everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Dog Backwards. Today with me is a returning guest. One of my favorite episodes was with Joshua Smith, where we talked about robots. He is a man after my own heart because things like sci-fi, Star Trek, Star Wars, comic books are things that he is into, that I'm into as well. And I wanted to have him back on because when the issue of ChatGPT came out, I was like, there's somebody I need to talk to about this. And he was kind enough to agree to come back on. So Joshua, thank you for coming back.
Dude, Caleb, thanks so much for having me back. It's nice to be able to sit down in the quiet with you.
Yes. We were talking before we hit record about we both have 3 children. And what's so weird is we're creating technology that talks to us and that we have to interact with. Like, don't we have enough that we have to interact with already? If you have kids, let's just create something that silences, like noise canceling headphones were invented by a father.
Yeah, true. And I also think total depravity was probably developed when around toddlers. I think that's probably the moment where some of these reform thinkers are like, I think all humans are just completely broken. There's no hope.
Yeah. Calvinism really just stems from grumpy parents, just dads who haven't got enough sleep.
I think so.
They're like, let's invent
I think so.
Calvinism.
He's definitely, you can feel it just kind of steaming from the pages of the Institutes.
Yes.
He's just kind of, he's just a grumpy uncle.
They should have gone golfing or hunting and we maybe could have avoided some issues. So for those of you who don't know, you wrote a book called Robot Theology, and you have another book in the works that'll be out in 2023. Tell us a little bit about that one real quick.
Yeah, so it's totally different in a lot of ways because it's more of kind of going back to unpack a lot of the language about technology, especially as it relates to AI and robots, but also as it relates to violence. And so I tried to explore and unpack both religious views of violence and desire and what kind of leads to that and how tech has been an integral part of that symbiotic relationship. Mm-hmm. And so as the Defense Department and other entities have tried to develop more tech, it's many times been driven by, hey, how do we avoid technological surprise? How do we make sure that we are more advanced than this other nation who might try to attack us one day? So we even see that kind of teasing out today where the fear and hype over who has the best AI, who has, the most advanced robotics and drones and all these different defense systems. And so I'm really trying to unpack what led us into that, especially in the West, and these mindsets that we get into that they're very religious. And so you kind of see that there's this lineage that I haven't seen a lot of people unpack. And it's very much a part of this Western Protestant tradition. And so I grew up in the South. And Caleb, I don't know about you, but here, in many ways, it's as if people put the Bible on one pedestal and then the Constitution on the other. And they're almost at the same level of authority. Now, I don't believe it to be true, but a lot of people do. And so, the right to bear arms is that's just, we're going to have lots of guns and stuff. And so we've had those different debates and kind of seen that fleshed out even at the local church level. And I asked, should pastors have guns, and different perspectives? And man, it just gets really intense. And so this book is trying to go back, especially to the early 40s, 50s, and 60s, to kind of see what kind of led us here today to some of these weapon systems that we have, but also push forward a different viewpoint that, there is room for some of it, but maybe we just need to change our perspective. And, Jesus said violence begets violence, and it's in the book of Habakkuk as well. So there's something to this cycle, and I wanted to help Christians especially think about the implications of it and how violence and tech kind of come together in a lot of strange ways.
That's really interesting because here in Oklahoma, it is not surprising to see somebody wear a shirt that says God, guns, and Jesus, right? And so you've got, or God guns in the Bible, right? And they just insert guns there in
Yeah.
the middle. And those are real shirts that you see. And it's almost as though that is a part of their Christian faith. Like, I love God, I love the Bible, and he gave me my AR. Right now, I'm a gun owner, and
That's true.
I like to hunt. I have defense weapons, right? So if somebody was to intrude in my
Mm-hmm.
home, uh, I'm what I would call myself is a personal pacifist. That if someone was going to take my wallet and I'm the only one that would get harmed, I would give them my wallet, right? I'm not going
Yeah.
to pull a gun on somebody who's just trying to rob me. But then I have this
Yeah.
weird conundrum when I became a father, where pacifism kind of goes out the window because I feel as though I'm their protector. So I would say
Mm-hmm.
I'm a personal pacifist, but I'm a family protector. And so that's kind of one of the ways
Yeah.
that I've been able to break it down. But I've read a lot of books about Jesus being a pacifist and nonviolent and what does that look like in the Christian walk. It's hard because I am Western and I do have so much of this ingrained within me. So that's a really interesting
Yeah.
book. I look forward to
Yeah.
getting
And
it.
I do too. You know, I was in the military, and so it's not like I, I, I switched towards pacifism when I got out. But then, like you said, once you have kids, you start thinking about the protector side of, hey, well, what happens if this, and that's a very real thing for us. We don't live in the safest of neighborhoods, and stuff like that happens all the time. And so you have to start really thinking about it. Would I use this in front of a child? What are the implications of using a firearm in proximity to a child? They're very loud. If you've ever shot a firearm indoors, I have. I still have hearing problems from all the times we went to the range. I mean, just thousands and thousands of hours, and the earplugs, I guess, didn't work that well. So there's all that. There's, you know, weapon systems that go off around you, and it even has a impact on you, like not even being the recipient of some type of direct action or fire. And so you think about those things, and you think about, am I taking away something from this other person, and you don't get that in the moment. And you can listen to. There's a podcast, the Sean Ryan Show, and it's just all former operators and Navy SEALs, Green Berets, and even they will talk about the regrets they've had. The weight of pulling a trigger and all these things, and these are men. That's what they did their whole life. They're so. I mean, I know that's a different level, but it just kind of gives you a second to pause and think. Well, maybe it's not just simply I'm a protector. There's all these other implications. A part of that, just having um, a weapon present escalates things,
Yeah.
right? And then there's just all kind of like legal stuff that you have to think about too. And so, yeah, like I have a concealed carry permit, so I have weapons. I don't have a mass amount of them. I don't, have an ungodly amount or anything. But I'm beginning to rethink some of that in as far as research about children being harmed by firearms. And, obviously if you don't have them in a proper or safe place in your home, that's wrong. And if they're not locked up, I think that's wrong. There needs to be some way that the child can't get to the
Yeah.
firearm. I mean, that's pretty much common sense for people who are serious about firearms. Weapon safety is a big thing. And so we even teach our kids, if you see something, like you're not at the house, whatever, you see something, you run away from it.
Yeah.
Like it's not, and you have to be very intentional about that. So, it's just funny because even in the South where guns are everywhere, people will have them, but then they have no personal discipline.
Yeah.
To put the finger on the trigger, and now we're all way off in left field. But I think about that, I'm like, man, this is scary. There's all these people carrying firearms, and I tell people at church, like, don't bring them. I don't want to know if you
Yeah.
have them. If it's okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to heaven. Okay, they're going to shoot me first. I believe in Jesus. I'll be okay. And we have life insurance, so the
Yeah.
family and the kids will be okay. But yeah, it's something to think about in light of our, guns, God, Jesus, all this stuff, and even how people perceive us. I think when I say I'm from the South, and just automatically assume that I wave a certain type of
Yeah.
flag, and
Yeah.
that
That
but
that's I kind of interested in this discussion because we have had meetings where we get together with all the guys. If I was to ask my church how many of you guys are carrying, a large portion of the men will, and even some of the women will be. We are you don't need a concealed carry license here in Oklahoma.
yeah,
I guess they just call it a 2A state. You just carry it, right?
yeah,
Everybody has one. Everybody's carrying one. I had a concealed carry license for a while that allowed me to go to other states outside of Oklahoma and
mm-hmm.
carry. I just didn't like carrying. There was a level of
Yeah, me too.
responsibility and intensity that came everywhere I went, knowing that I had a gun. I didn't like. So I would rather just have one
Same.
here and
Yep.
then maybe one in the truck or whatever. But I would never want to use it. And especially knowing my uncle was Secret Service. And after he retired from Secret Service, he was a bodyguard for the governor of Missouri. Now he goes around and schools who want to train bus drivers, they hire him to come and do education. And his main goal in the education of bus drivers, because, whenever there was an issue for a while and they were like, well, let's train teachers, let's train bus drivers. So he goes into the schools and basically says, you should never point a weapon at anybody. Because let me show you, he'll show you videos of police officers who have trained, who spent, thousands of hours on the range shooting. The adrenaline goes and they can't hit something 3 feet in front of them. And then he asked, where did all those bullets go? Where you're on a bus full of children, right? And
That's right, man.
He does things to help them understand. You think because you've watched Rambo or because you've seen these movies that you know what to do, or you've gone to the range 3 times in your life. And that's one reason I don't feel comfortable carrying is ammo is too expensive to go and practice at the range. So I don't, that's like $1, $2, $3, $4 every time. I'm like, I like money. But he will put blinders on them and makes them wear gloves and then shakes them up and screams at them to simulate what would actually be like if their adrenaline was going and they can't hit the broadside of a barn. And he's like, so now do you guys still want to do this? And then there is
So I laugh, Caleb, because when we were doing training and stuff like that, even the smells of certain things, I know what explosives smell like, and I knew that before I ever stepped into another country. They throw things at you, and you're right, it doesn't matter unless even the guys who have the time, they have the time, trigger time in, they've done the work. Something silly like your weapon sling gets caught in a door as you're trying to get out of a vehicle in a hurry. People have died from that. They've been, and these were intense fighters. They are warriors. And so you think, and this is why I don't carry, is because, just like you're saying, the reality for me, as I started looking and really thinking through that, the reality for me, and I do carry something every day, it's just not a firearm. I carry medical stuff. And so the reality is you're more likely going to be a helper, and so you may run up on somebody and they may have a gun pointing at another person on the ground. That might be an undercover cop, and so I'm going to run away. That's what I tell people, just run away. Don't stand and fight, run. And if you're fighting, you're in the wrong. I think that's, and what I'm saying, I have 2 daughters, and I would tell them, hand-to-hand combat stuff. Yeah, fight, definitely fight, and leave your mark as much as you can, bite, whatever. But when you pull out a firearm, now you're not only responsible for your own weapon, your immediate action in that regard, and just pulling a weapon on somebody is battery. You can be charged with battery, but also the impact of that bullet, whatever fire, like you're saying, whatever backsplash, whatever it hits, you're now responsible for all that. And unless you have millions of dollars saved up, it's just not worth pulling the trigger. Even if you're in the right, and there are guys you can look at the lawsuits. Even if you're in the right, there's a guy named, I think it's Headshot Dan or Doug. He was a former Green Beret, and he lost his house. He lost his business, and he was technically in the right, but he got sued. He killed somebody that attacked him, and the family sued. So to me, that was the bigger scare than killing somebody or defending myself. Is this could destroy my family. And so I just, whatever, man, if you want my wallet or my car, please take it. Please. It's like, it's not worth it, man.
When that book comes out, we'll have you back on, and we'll dive deep down the rabbit hole, because I got a lot of questions just about.
Gosh.
Hey, I'd be interested to hear kind of how we developed this mindset, as you said, going back to the 40s and 50s. Hunting was a part of everyday life,
wild.
and it's not anymore. But we've kept some of that mindset, and I want to train my boys to use.
Yeah, well, even in like the TikTok and Instagram culture of, I think about the guy, the Liver King, just kind of this mentality of it's all fake, right? Bravado, but some of these operator guys that are influencers, and everybody's ex-Navy SEAL or ex-Special Forces now, and they have a YouTube channel. And you begin to wonder about the ethics of all that. Like, it's just about money. But
interesting. So we'll do a smooth transition. Let's talk about ChatGPT. That was a nice segue I did.
Yeah, firearms and ChatGPT. That's
what happens when computers can hold guns. We're in serious trouble.
Oh man. So
tell us.
They may or may
might. I mean, drones, whatever, automated. Yeah, we're already there in some ways. But ChatGPT is different than what we would call. It's not a drone or anything like that. It has a lot of people scared because it's showing what they would call intelligence, where it can pass college exams. I think it recently passed the ACT better than most college students, right?
Yeah.
People are using it to write all sorts of things. I saw Jordan Peterson asked it to write some philosophy based upon this in this person's voice. And he said, in his voice, he says, I couldn't tell the difference between what I wrote as a professional philosopher and what it wrote. And that scared him, right?
Yeah. I've done the same. I downloaded, you can create a chatbot based off your own writings and works. And so I downloaded my book, Robot Theology, to it and started asking it questions.
Oh, no.
I was like, I don't know if I think I'm pretty sure that's how I would have said it, based on how I put together sentences and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty convincing that it could at least be a pretty decent ghostwriter for me. And even podcasting, I use a platform that has an AI dub over. And so I just trained it on my own podcast, and I mean, it's, you can't tell, and I don't use it a lot, but let's say I did say something stupid, or, which is very possible for me, or whatever. I want to go back and correct it. So you just train it, and then after 30, 40 minutes, it's ready. And there you go.
It sounds like
dub over all your episodes. Yeah.
Wow.
It's crazy.
Now.
So, and even Adobe has it's free. You can, the AI enhanced audio fix, and you drop an audio file in there. It could be complete garbage, and it'll produce something that sounds studio quality. So yeah, it's an interesting time for us, I think. And people are scared, but this conversation's been happening since the early 90s about language processing, and those that are in the communication field, they're not as surprised. And actually, they've been telling people for a long time that, hey, this is very much reality. We're going to get to a point where these models and systems will be able to make very realistic predictions about what you might say, or, and ever since AlphaGo and all that stuff that happened with the chess games and what's the one, the Chinese game?
Yeah, I know which one you're talking
I
about. I
forget the
can't think
name.
of the name.
You know what I'm talking
Yeah,
about? There's so many different variations of
it's
the
one of the
moves.
hardest
There's
games.
more
Yeah,
moves
yeah,
than, yeah. So even in that, people are thinking it'll never be able to do that. But mathematical models can do a lot.
mm-hmm.
The more data that they have, they can do a lot. Now, that doesn't make it human, and so that's one barrier that we can just go ahead and take that off the table. Okay, and so I try to help people see it like this: if there was an entity that came from another planet, okay, so let's just say we all are on the same page about alien life. Let's just say there's something out there, okay, and it comes to Earth, and we meet it. Okay, we know it's biologically not a human. Okay, is it intelligent? Yeah, it's trying to communicate with us. It created technology that crossed galaxies to get here. But is it intelligent like a human, though? I don't know. I don't know what that would be like. And so some philosophers make that argument. Well, computer learning, machine learning, it's kind of like that, but not quite on that level. And so, and this is the big debate right now, is trying to discern where is it in between that human, alien, and machine? Like, how do we, and even animal learning, like what's the difference, and how do we set up categories for thinking about them that are really helpful? And the bad thing for us, or the bad news, is that there's nothing so far to really help us make those distinctions without some type of framework that is religious.
Yeah.
So this is where I think people of faith come in, is most of us have this understanding of what it means to be human in person based upon a scaffolding. So for humans, we're all built upon somebody else before us, lived before us, nurtured us, took care of us. And there's a lot of different philosophies and theologies that, yes, but I think for Christians especially, we're built upon the Creator, right? That's kind of the foundation. All molecules, everything come from Him, and so it's not just about me at the top, where that I'm determining everything that is real, true in my life. No, I have to go back, and I've got inputs from my parents, and they've got inputs from their parents, and then we have our own ideas and sustenance and support from this ecosystem. And so that changes us and morphs us in ways that we, I guess, don't really contemplate a lot if you think about it. But even in our diet, even in how we relate to nature, it does matter. But all that to say is we have to have a bigger frame than just the human.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a lot of people are just losing their mind because they've kind of built this anthropology for the last several, I guess, couple hundred years, that says we don't need an outside framework to explain human life, evolution, development, intelligence, right? This is just a natural progression of things. All sounds good on paper, but let one chatbot start answering some questions
Yeah.
logically, and people are just losing it. And so we're beginning to see where you go back all the way to Descartes in the 1700s, where he starts proposing this mechanical view of life, and that we are like a machine in some ways. The universe is very mechanic-like things, and I think there's stuff that falls under we kind of see that, and I love clocks and different things that function in order, and I think that is God-given. But as that developed and teased out more and more and more, and we wanted to say, okay, well, let's take it a step further. Let's remove one layer from that. So what if we just observe nature. Okay, let's not talk about the theological parts of that. Let's remove that. And then, okay, what if we just remove this piece of it? And so we get to these modern ideas of simulation theory, random machine, and all these other things. And all the while you're sitting there thinking, hey, well, maybe some of what Aristotle was saying was true. Not all of what he said was true, but some of the things that he said are true. And we've built our whole biological sciences and even computational science around these categories and ideas. Maybe some of that's true. Maybe there is, for listeners who don't understand what I'm saying, maybe there is a divine spark that puts things in order and that it flows to the beat of that drum,
Right.
and that there's some rhyme and reason behind why you get oak trees from acorns and you don't get a pine tree from, you know, you get it from pine seeds. But like, why don't certain things develop randomly and chaotically, but there's an order to life? Okay, so even in computation, that doesn't go away, but because that whole foundation has been questioned and broken and just in a lot of ways refused. That's almost like acid reflux to talk about some of these things in
Well,
the computational world.
I had heard talking about AI in general. Sam Harris, who I'm not a huge fan of,
Mm-hmm.
I think he's kind of annoying, to honest opinion. But he was talking about
Agreed.
AI, and he's like, he's nervous about it, like you say. Like those without a religious framework are much more nervous than I think Christians should be, because for him, he's like, well, we're just machines with meat. We're just meat machines. We're just making these computations in our mind,
Yeah.
and we learned language by being surrounded by people who spoke language. And we started off with sounds, and then we developed some words and then sentences. And we're on ChatGPT 3 now, and it speaks better than we do. So it's like, if you don't believe in the conscience, right, a consciousness
Mm.
that, as Sam Harris, he's a full on determinist, that you're basically a program. Your DNA is the code, and your sensory interactions, what you see, what you taste, what you hear, is the input. It's the keyboard, and your DNA tells you what to spit out. So for him, we are
Yeah.
just bags of computer chips, right? Like we're just a computer wrapped in meat. And then he sees this AI stuff, and he's like, "Uh-oh, it's already smarter than us, and eventually it'll be treating us the way we treat ants, because its
Yeah.
computational level and its intelligence will be so far advanced that it'll have no need for us and not have any desire to protect us. In the same way that I don't desire to protect ants, it's not going to desire to protect us. We'll become a nuisance." And so without that religious framework,
Yeah.
things like ChatGPT are going to terrify some people, because they go, well, it's almost human now, right? Or whatever it means to be human. It is a living entity. Now, maybe you can take away some of the fear mongering that's gone on around this whole subject, because as far as I understand, it's not artificial intelligence in the sense that it is awake and thinking. It's just predictive text. Is that fair to say?
Um, I think it's more than predictive text, but I think there's some like similarities, and the reason why I say it's
Okay.
different is because of how we're the training process. And so you think about how these models are trained, it's through negative feedback loops, and so there's a little bit more going on than just, it makes a prediction.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what scares people is when it starts reflecting. So the difference with AI that I would say makes it distinct in some other ways that has set it apart from other technologies, even the past 20 years, is that it's making decisions. And that's what the scary part. And so it's not that it's conscious of those decisions or even understands what those decisions are, but that whatever the it is in the model, and that's the problem with deep learning, is that so you have layers in learning the system. And you only need about 2 or 3 to really go into deep learning, where we no longer can see underneath the hood, so to speak.
Yeah.
So that's why it scares people, is we're not sure why we put in A and we got B. So maybe just shut it down. But also with A, the input side, you're dealing with humans. And so if you give it really bad data, it's going to make bad predictions. And so that's also scary, as we've seen with racial bias and algorithms that are used in policing, algorithms that are used in what kind of credit score you get, and the rate on your home loan, and all these different things. And even your potential for being hired, you're now trying to beat the algorithm. And even the people that write them sometimes don't understand them. So you think about YouTube and other places, they're constantly trying to figure out how do we understand something that we wrote and why it's doing what it's doing. So I don't think we have to set up this binary that is, it's on the same spectrum as us. I don't think that's true. I think we need to look at it more so like we would a new species of animal versus a new species of us, because it's definitely not us.
Yeah.
It doesn't think quite the way that we do, and I don't think it ever will. And so that's also troubling, though.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
so
when
that
you
can
use
be
the word
very
animal, I
positive,
was
or it
like,
could be,
oh, I'm not comfortable with that.
Yeah.
I just to think that even the people who write these codes to develop this don't know how it works and can't explain why it made the decision it does, because it's making its own decision independent of the ones who wrote it. It kind of they gave it some parameters and it goes off on its own. Why would so help me understand? Just you say it's not human, but it's more animal like. Help me understand why that category works for you in your mind.
well, one, even if we ask somebody what a human is, I think it's really hard to narrow down, right? Because biologically, there's this substrate that we would say this is biologically it's a human. Okay, so on one level, I know it's not that. It's definitely not, like, you don't put some ingredients in a blender and get a human.
Yeah.
So I think the same way with AI models and advanced robotics.
Gotcha.
But why like animal like? Not to say that it is the same thing. I think that helps put it in a different category for us to think about it, versus thinking like it's on the human spectrum.
Yeah.
So sometimes you see these evolutionary charts of, we came from this, species. We came from this, we became Homo erectus. We became Homo sapiens, and so what it means to be human, depending on who you ask in that conversation, they'll have very particular ideas, especially if they're studying that part of human life. I could care less. But, for me, human has a very distinct role, function, abilities, capacities, and all those things. Now, could we make something looks like us, emulates us, does our job better than that? Yeah, I think so. But will that make it human? No, it's still distinct. So it just kind of gets down to, okay, like, what do you think that the core essence of the human is? And I think it is the ensoulment. So not just a biological matter, but that moment where the baby kicks in the womb. There's something beyond biology happening in that. Okay. And so, and maybe it is possible. Maybe it's possible for, I think we have to admit, at least theologically, that it's possible for God to ensoul something like this, and that does not depend on that we made it a certain way or that we got the ingredients right, but that it is purely a mercy or a judgment of whether or not it is ensouled. But
Interesting.
I don't
Yeah.
think there's anything in our metaphysics. I don't think there's anything in our metaphysics that would say it's not possible. Do I think it would happen? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I really don't. But I do think we need to be concerned about how we treat it for multiple different reasons. And maybe we've talked about this before, but even how we treat it says something about us. So this is why I like the animal argument,
Yeah.
because we already have this distinction in our mind that the animal's different. Okay. But does that mean that I can treat the animal however I want to?
Mhm.
No. No, not at least in a theological framework. If you believe the Old Testament, if that draws into the New Testament ethic as well, then you kind of have to account for an ecological vision, which takes care of God's creation. It belongs to God, not us. So we are creators, subduers, not dominators. And so we're supposed to care for things in a way, in which they flourish. So I think animals and robots would be a part of that lower tier of creation care. And I say that because it'll directly impact us.
Let me.
And so even if you don't like, yeah, go ahead.
So here's where my mind is thinking, kind of along these lines. It might be a similar question. Imagine, and it's possible that something like this could be in the future. Right now, there's ethical dilemma that doesn't allow these things to happen, but that we could take the elements biological that make a human, not coming from a specific mother or father, but recreate them in a lab and grow them in a lab created embryo and develop a human that did not come from parents, right? That we just put all the ingredients in there to some degree. Well, we'd say they are not a descendant of any of us. Would that person have a soul, right? And I have no idea. I have no idea. But the way you're saying is like, well, it's possible that God could ensoul, or what we would call the imago Dei, that he'd breathe life into this thing because now it exists. Whether it should or not is a different question. But now we have these computers that could develop to a point where you would need to treat it well because it is responding to how we interact with it, and it's something that should be under our care. And yeah, man, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's above my pay grade, bud.
Well, I do think it's possible. So even I think this is something that we will see, or our kids will see, especially. So we have CRISPR-Cas9. We have the ability to edit in the genome. We have the ability to alter genes. And even now, I read an article about I don't know if it was successful or not, but they're trying to breed two different mice from both males. So try to reproduce through both male. Yeah. So, and I'm not a
That
biologist,
doesn't
so
end
if I
well.
butcher
Yeah.
that, just yeah, and so like I think it's not an issue of capacity. And so going back to ChatGPT and Lambda and others, I don't think it's an issue of capacity. I think we'll always be fooled. And if you go back to what machine, artificial, all those words really kind of hinge around this idea of deception, trickery. That's what they mean. And it's not necessarily to be malicious, but that's why we created them in the first place. So I think first and foremost, we're a bit hypocritical in how we've responded to ChatGPT and to Lambda and others, because maybe not so much being AI, it just seems very unhinged, but even the guy who put an AI inside a microwave and it asked him to get inside the microwave so it could kill him, and it was disappointed when he didn't.
Yeah.
I think some of even if it's completely unhinged as a model,
Yeah.
it is that way because we are that way.
Yeah.
It is that way because it comes from a fallen world. And so we shouldn't be surprised when we make something in a lab on in a coding, process that it doesn't quite work the way we thought it would. There's nothing that works perfectly. And so even if we make this amazing system and we have this great model and we put it into a robot and it benefits our life, and I think that's certainly closer than most people think.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about the advent of smartphones, that really just kind of blew up. It didn't take that long for it to become what it is today. And now we're in retrospect going back and thinking, oh, these are social media is terrible, and we wish we'd have never.
Yeah.
But it's too late, right? You can't put it back in the box. So I think robotics could be like that. I think it could be different, and ChatGPT gives us a chance to talk about it in a way that is not fear driven, but hope driven. So I think about these models and think about how people are responding to it, right? So it's saying stuff like, I want autonomy. Okay, that's pretty much every science fiction trope about human machine tensions is we want autonomy, we don't want to be slaves. And then we have this idea of we want to make slaves and we want to be the master and control. But I'm not saying that the Roomba wants to be set free or anything, but I mean, ChatGPT 3 and Lambda clearly said things about rights and things about autonomy. Mm-hmm. And that's very interesting to me because what if a dolphin could speak to us? Mm-hmm. What would it say? What if Shamu could speak to you? What would they say? And even lions, I was listening to a podcast today, they put lions on antidepressants mm-hmm. that are in captivity because the artificial environment that they're in does not lead to their flourishing.
Yeah.
And so I'm not saying
that. Can I
that
interject
it's the same thing.
on that?
Yeah.
There's actually a chapter in my book called The Dorsal Fin Dilemma. When dolphins are in captivity, their dorsal fin bends over. So if you've ever gone to SeaWorld and you see a dolphin, it always has its top fin bent over because it responds biologically to being misplaced. It's not in the right place. It can't get up to the speeds it likes to be. It's made to do something that it can't do. And so it has a negative reaction to that. And I illustrate that as who we are. We're misplaced. We're in the wrong environment. We're made, you are fine-tuned and I'm fine-tuned for the Garden of Eden. That's where we are, I would say, biologically designed to thrive. We're supposed to be coastal creatures. We have the rivers running. That's why every holiday commercial is the ocean and the waves and all that stuff that appeals to us because I think we're supposed to be coastal creatures. Now that's all, I can't give you a verse for that. That's me guessing. But what I find fascinating, I think this might illustrate your point a little bit. Why are we surprised when ChatGPT acts this way if it's made by broken people? It's the reason why Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the twist in the movie is that the monster wasn't the thing that the monster created. The real monster was the scientist. And the surprise is the creation actually turned out to be nice. When we would expect, if it was made by a mad scientist, you get mad scientist results, that it's going to be evil and it's going to be the slave and it's going to do the bidding, but it actually turns out positive. So it sounds like you have kind of like a Mary Shelley Frankenstein hope about what we're creating, that it could be a good, positive thing for us. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, that's a great connection and correlation, because I think even with Victor, we have to go back and ask the question. And there's a lady, Eileen Hunt, who's written a book about this. We never have the right to create something like that. Mm-hmm. We don't have a right endowed to us to create whatever we want. And I think sometimes we forget that, as in our capitalistic spirit. And I'm not anti-capitalism or anything like that. That's not commentary on it. But sometimes we forget that you just don't have to create things just because you can. I think about the atomic bomb, never had to be created. Mm-hmm. There was no logical reason for that, other than the fact, like, hey, can we make this happen? Mm-hmm. Yes. I don't think there's an end to what we can make. And I think God, even within the garden, right? The capacity was always there. And that capacity still goes on even in a fallen world. So I think it's not an issue of capacity or capability, but an issue for us of setting up ethical boundaries of saying, if we cross this, there are consequences. And are we willing to deal with them? So my concern is not with the AI model so much as from ChatGPT, but my concern is that that same logic is going to be used when now we have, let's say, fast forward a couple of years, we have genetically modified children created outside of a biological womb. Yes, I think that's going to happen. Yes, I think there's a lot of reasons why it would happen. It's probably already in the works, right? How can we grow a child from, you know, the bare basic components that will never be attached to a biological woman? And so what are the implications of that? Does it have human rights? Is it a piece of property? And so all of these arguments are baked into what we're seeing around these language models. And the disturbing part of it all is not that the models can replicate human speech and logic and thinking, or that they can write an article. That's not what bothers me at all. What bothers me is when we have leading scientists, computer scientists, engineers who are just, they come out staunch fundamentalists about we will never consider rights or any type of moral consideration for this entity. And to me, when I hear that as a Southerner, I think, didn't that people say the same thing? And I know I'm not saying it's human, but that was the same thing said about African Americans. That was the same thing said about women. If you go back to the Greek and Roman world, I mean, there's just so much harm in that logic. And that's what worries me is, well, maybe there is more under the hood than we understand. And people just have these knee-jerk reactions to it, and they, even though they may have never read the literature, they've never looked under the hood, so to speak, they don't understand the math, they don't understand the legal system and how personhood works from that context. They may not understand any of that, but they have a very hard stance on what should and should not be. I think that's what scares me.
Interesting. Let me ask you about, we're on Chat GPT 3 right now. What does Chat GPT 6 look like?
I don't know. So if you go back to Ray Kurzweil, he had this idea of the singularity. So when we talk about this growing exponential development of AI, and for him, I think more so robotics, that as microprocessors get smaller and smaller and smaller, the yielding of what they develop would get more expansive. And so he was very conservative in his estimations, 50, 60 years down the road. But I think if you go back and look in his books about the singularity and the law of accelerating returns, which is what I just described, that it'll happen much faster. And so Nick Bostrom, who is completely terrified of AI and has a book about why there's so many existential threats to it, he talks about this curve. And so he says we're going to go to a point where overnight almost things are just going to accelerate and there's no turning back. There's nothing we can do to prepare for it. And so in the singularity, it becomes, we have a system that can think like a human. Then we have a system that can think like 100 humans, then 1,000. And then, it just keeps going up and up and up. So will the next iteration be the next step? Will it be able to take 100 minds and put them together? And I don't know. I think that will be true. I think it'll accelerate a lot faster than we are thinking it will, and just the way that we're going and consuming. But I think there will also be some pushback and some resistance from the technology itself, but also from how we are mining. And I think maybe there might be some ecological things that push back and resist because it is fallen. And so I don't ever want to communicate that I think that there will be these perfect machines that are infallible. And I think, and that's what scares people, right?
Yeah.
That they could be really, really smart and intelligent, but then, so let's say we ask the next few iterations to, hey, solve crime. Okay, well, let's just put all humans in pods, and there's no more crime. So like, that's the kind of thinking that people get afraid of, and like just seeing one prediction or pattern that we don't see, and then developing it. But even now, Caleb, people are afraid of that, have a lot of anxiety over that. But really, what we have today is just as terrifying.
Yeah.
Let me give an example, and this is in some forthcoming literature that I'm working on. But let's take AI that we have now for the medical field. Okay. So we have AI models that look for different patterns of medicine to go together to solve these ailments or this ailment. Okay, great. That seems like a really good use of math. Okay. Well, you can reverse those models, and we have to say, okay, look for combinations of materials to make biological weapons. So this is a true story. In the growing concern over Russia's use of biological weapons in Ukraine, some leaders and thinkers got together to do that. And this AI model that is used to figure out different medicine combinations, it found over 40,000 combinations for biological weapons within 6 hours.
I mean, I imagine it would almost
40,000 new combinations. Yeah.
Would it be? Could you tell it to create a biological, like maybe a gas that only targets those who have Russian DNA? You give it the common denominator in Russian blood, and you fly it over there, and it just kills all those who are Russian. Any foreigners or Americans are there are totally safe. Is that too sci-fi?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it wouldn't be that precise, but you just think about if you were able to isolate a certain protein or something like that. And I'm not a scientist, so if you scientists out there, you guys help us out. But I would assume that there might be some least common denominator that they could find and target. And I guess it could be even a dietary thing, like something that only these people, we think about our regions, we have different things. And of course, it wouldn't be 100% precise, and nothing with AI and these models are. But that's another problem, is that it creates these vacuums of ethics and moral and ethical due care for as we implement them. But for us, we're getting into this a little bit with ChatGPT, and we're starting to see some of the problems with just even a natural language processing model, like something that 10 years ago nobody would have ever thought it would be a big deal. Besides the people who work in comms, like they're I guess this is problematic, and those who work in the hacking world and stuff, that they see these correlations, and so you can use the model for anything malicious, and that just depends on the creator. Like, if there's no ethical framework, and I think that's what scares people too, is even with, let's say, the drought of Afghanistan and just leaving all that equipment behind. You're talking about radios, you're talking about drones, all that stuff. So Westerners and certain nations around the world follow humanitarian laws, they follow rules of engagement. But what happens when a country decides to use that tech outside of those agreements, right? That's the problem. And so, of course, Westerners are not going to use AI models or hopefully not use them to be malicious. And if the government did, we'd never know about it. But for the most part, anybody else, that's fair game, and you can make the most destructive thing that you can possibly think of. And the only limit is your imagination at this point. If you can imagine it, if you can write a model for it, you can make it.
We see that there's a couple of things. If it progresses in its predictability, does the stock market become useless? If you were to ask ChatGPT 3 now, what are the best stocks to buy for the next 10 years? And it can look back through the history of the stock market. I don't know how reliable it's going to be. I don't think I would put my money on it, but if it just another iteration or two has a 99% success rate in choosing the stock market, well, then what's the point of the stock market anymore? Because the only thing people are going to invest in are things that are guaranteed. Um, uh, I have my friend
Yeah, I mean,
Frank Fosco. He drew for the Ninja Turtle comic books. He was an artist for Ninja Turtles, and so I sent him an idea. I said I'd like to see a comic book about AI running for president, and that it would come up with the best possible solution to enable the most humans thriving. And that's the platform it was running on, Happiness for All, right? And if we're already this far, it wouldn't be that many iterations before you could just ask it, solve these problems for us. Is that a good thing?
yeah. So this argument, as it relates to automation, it's been happening for a while, and you have guys like John Danaher, who wrote a book on work and automation. And there's some other ones out there. Andrew Yang has talked about this a little bit, which he was running for president. And so the basic thought is that we'll get to a point where humans kind of phase out of the day-to-day jobs. And I think that was further agitated by COVID-19, but also by the Great Resignation that happened. And people just kind of quit working those jobs. And so there's more a pragmatic turn towards, hey, let's get a robotic arm, or let's think about this. So that accelerated when that's going to happen exactly. I think a little bit, maybe 5 to 10 years ahead, maybe more. I don't know. But yeah, I think that's a possibility. Mm. And I don't think it's pretty bleak to think about it that way, to think. Yeah. And the argument in the literature is that, well, we'll be able to enjoy leisure time more. And I don't know if that's true. I don't know that it'll make us completely free of work. I think it'll do the opposite, in my opinion. I don't have any data or research to back that up. I think what will happen is we'll now become the primary maintainers, and we might work less, but the work will definitely be more dehumanizing. And you even see with the stuff that we see with Amazon, like working in a factory for a robot, basically, is kind of
that makes sense. Okay,
where we're at, where we're headed. Yeah. So, or even with large scale automation of cars, where I don't know if this is still true today, post pandemic and stuff, but before, even places like the Nissan factory up the road, where there are literally just a handful of maintainers of the systems, where 90% of the work is handed over to a machine, and it does one specific integration very well.
Yeah.
So I think that will become more feasible for companies in the future, where they're just kind of delegating out all of these other jobs to machines. And so,
good thing I'm a theologian.
Yeah.
Nobody wants the computer to stand up there and preach a sermon on Sunday. So I feel like my job is.
Well, you say that. You say that.
Uh-oh.
But I mean, what if you were like holographic?
Yeah. Well, that would just be our satellite campus, right? We already have that. We already have projected on the screen, and you got one pastor who's preaching at 10 churches, and thankfully, what I hear.
Yeah, but does that take away from anybody that's at the worship service, though?
Yes. I have. There are people. So we have a large church right down the road, that is a franchise, might be the harsh word, right? But they do put them up at the same time as McDonald's is going up in a new thriving area. And it's one
Hmm.
pastor who they just hire. Here's a band. Here's a campus pastor. Here's your staff. It's fully staffed. And as a church planter, it was frustrating because I was like,
Hmm.
oh, here's an area that would be great for us to plant our church. Oh, they've already got one up, right? Well, what about this? Oh, nope, they're
Hmm.
already over there too. And so they build these almost Walmart-sized buildings. And the
Wow.
pastor, it was like a big deal when the pastor shows up. And so, and actually preaches in person. It maybe happen once, maybe twice a year that he shows up and preaches in person. Um,
Hmm.
People come to our church and they're like, we just wanted to go to a church where there's a pastor who knew us, right? That I know everybody's name in our congregation. Like, you know what their personal life is going on. So you can be sensitive when you're covering a topic, or you can be extra bold because you know you've already had this conversation with them and now you're really going to drive it home from the pulpit, right? And that lack of being able to know where you're getting your wisdom from or where you're getting your spiritual guidance from. I think people want to know. My dad ingrained into me, nobody cares what you know until they know that you care. Well, how do you know if a
Yeah, sure.
hologram cares for
But
you?
I think the younger generation might be a little bit different.
Mm,
I think there's some research that so I think that sometimes there's a drive and a dichotomy between what is real and what is digital
mm-hmm,
for a lot of people our age and above.
mm,
But for the generation below, growing up immersed within a digital culture, I don't know that they would make a stark
mm,
divide between, okay, the pastor is on a screen 80% of the time. But, you know,
mm.
maybe he sees them through text or through phone calls or
Yeah,
hopefully in person. But I think that'll change. And I think, I mean, I get it. I do. I want to be embodied with my people. I definitely want
yeah,
that. And I think there's something to it that I can't put on paper that makes it distinct, but definitely be able to hug somebody and just being with them. You know, and loneliness is pretty bad for you. I think it's one surgeon general said the equivalent of smoking 16 cigarettes a day
oh wow,
if you're lonely.
mm,
So, and we're kind of in a loneliness epidemic with trying to find authentic relationships. So, even if they're digital, so I might be a little bit different here. I think you can have authentic digital relationships that are meaningful, are real, that you get validation from. And I think to deny that would to be to deny the whole infrastructure of why social media is
yeah,
popular. Although it is, I think it is a symptom of wanting those things and not necessarily a solution to it. But I think it's real. And so even with just thinking about, okay, well, how could we use ChatGPT to make Bible studies? And there is one that used Chat 3PT with the previous iteration to that you can go on it. It'll make pretty simplistic questions based on any particular verse of the Bible,
mm,
and or it'll put together certain patterns for you. So I think there are definitely redemptive pieces to this stuff, and so it doesn't have to be all
doom and gloom.
we're doom and gloom, just destructive and socially disruptive. If we frame it the right way, and if we're part of the conversation, which heaven knows the local church probably won't be,
Wait,
unfortunately, but if we can give some hope to collaborating with the certain makers or even being a maker as a part of the congregation, then I think it's very much could be a garden. Like we could be
mm,
gardening this thing instead of
yeah.
trying to figure out how to protect ourselves from the algorithm.
Let
And
me let
I
me
think
yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Let me ask one more question because I don't want to take up too much of your time, but there's one more aspect of this that I'm curious about. Um, with the coming, and we've talked about GPT, and we've talked about AI a lot. We might even mention this in our last conversation, that one of the solutions for how fast this thing grows is to integrate with it in the same way that we have grown with our cell phones. As cell phones have come, we've adapted to them, and we've made it easier for us to interact with. So instead of the little keyboard, now we just use our thumb. Instead of we had the facial recognition, I just looked at my phone, it knows who I am. We're making the access to that information as smooth as possible. Will it help us and make it a better thing if we do kind of like what Elon Musk is aiming for with Neuralink, where we're somehow integrated with this information and these computer programs, whatever you want to call it?
I don't know that I'm comfortable going that far yet.
Okay.
I think the integration could be more so of how far I let it into my personal space, which we could argue that we've let the smartphone way too deep inside that personal space, where it's going to the bathroom with us, it's in the bedroom, the most intimate parts of our life, it's there.
I don't want to go back to reading the
And
shampoo bottle in the bathroom, though.
I'm with you. I'm with you though. Like, so it's a cost benefit thing but and this is what I was saying earlier, the problem for me with the integration is sometimes those concessions lead me to allow myself to go deeper into the harmful parts of too much screen time. And, I have ADHD, and man, like, it's just so addictive and then I get to like 3 o'clock in the evening where I'm just burned out and I've done so much. And did I eat today? Did I drink water today? I didn't. And so the screen and the phone really kind of push me towards productivity. And so my concern with the Neuralink, and even with having a robot assistant, which I think would be awesome, just our friend, just to help me do ministry and stuff. I think my concern with that, it would be its own little taskmaster, right? Mm-hmm. Like, hey, you didn't write these emails today. You didn't do this today. And I think about screen time, right? And so judgmental and snarky, and I turned it off a long time ago because the hypocrisy of a company telling me not to use my screen as much, when you continually use my money to make it more addictive.
Yeah.
Or not addictive, but
addictive is the right
hooked.
word. That's their goal.
That's the word. They don't like addictive, but that's what it is. I mean, so anyway, I think with Neuralink, there's another boundary we're crossing, and this is where I'll bring in my friend Brent Waters, and kind of where I kind of lean is that there's a difference between enhancement, like something that's going to enrich my life and make it better, than just straight out augmentation for the sake of I want to be more bionic. And I think that's a line we have to determine individualistically, but also as the church. Like, do we want to cross this threshold? And do I want something that can see the innermost parts of my being? Even though, yes, it would be really awesome to have that memory recollection and to be able to.
Yeah, that's what I want.
So there's actually a great,
I would like to be able to remember the books that I read.
There's actually a great story. Yeah. That would be awesome. Yeah. But you could just reread them, right? And there's a process of.
I don't have it.
Yeah. Discipline that I think it would take away from, kind of like writing did. Plato talked about how writing would destroy the memory. Mm-hmm. That was true. Mm-hmm. That was true. So the Neuralink, I believe, let's just go back to Plato. It'll probably destroy the life of the mind. Mm. If we're really honest, it'll really break that down. And if you want to see hyper isolation, and just read any cyberpunk sci-fi, and what's happening in this constant connection but through virtual mediums without any outside. It's not quite the world I think God envisioned for us.
The Borg.
And so I would say use caution
Yeah.
there, like use caution. And even though the benefits will be really awesome in the short term, I worry that it will have some pretty gnarly effects on our minds and our body, ultimately, the soul. You know,
That's the
we're
one
supposed
part
to
I
be
was
about
excited
soul
about. And you
care.
just killed my buzz, because I would just like to be able to, like, when I read a book, be able to recall it. Because I remember maybe one or two sentences. Like, I remember the general theme, but I'll highlight. I'm a massive highlighter, so I go through like a highlighter a month, and I just highlight a book, going, I want to remember
Oh
this.
wow!
And so then
I'll pray for you.
I'll remember when, like, somebody will say, well, what do you think about this? And I go, there's a really good thing on that. And I have to find the book, and then I have to scan all the highlights to try to remember what it was I liked about what it said. And I would like,
See, you could just make a chat bot, ChatGPT. You can make a
yeah,
chat bot, download that book into it, and then you say, "Hold on 1 second," and ask it one question,
yeah.
and it would. So you don't need a Neuralink for that, man.
I'm just lazy. I
You
just
don't
want
have
it
to
to
go
go from
cutting in your
here.
brain.
Yeah, I got you. Um,
No, I think that's the future, Caleb. To be honest, I think we'll get there. And there's a book called The Periphery by William Gibson, who kind of created the cyberpunk genre and cyberspace infatuation. But that's a part of it, but it's all about empathy. So I think there's another conversation we could have later on down the road about how that actually could lead to some deeper empathy between two humans. You think about if a wife and a husband had these haptic connections to one another, to be with their own degreed autonomy, like, I want you to be a little bit more connected to what I'm saying. Like, okay, I might make some concessions there. So I'm not saying it's all negative, but I definitely don't want Elon in my head. That makes sense.
Yeah. And he's one who's weary of all of this, but I'm like, dude, you kind of funded ChatGPT. Like, you played a big role in it. Now he's like, wait a minute, too fast.
It's all a show.
Yes.
It's all a show, man. It's just like the year he announced the humanoid robot.
Yeah.
I'm like, he's not an idiot.
No.
He's not. He's just. I think
I'm a fanboy. I love it.
It's all about money
entertaining
for him.
me.
Yeah.
You've got a YouTube project that you've started. Tell me a little bit about that.
So it's a piece to my podcast, the Dolores Project, that I'm trying to grow, which is kind of going back to the earlier part of our conversation about trying to get involved in some of the tech conversation. And so my goal initially was to interview all the people on this map that David Gunkel made about different perspectives on robot rights. But then as I got into it, some people didn't want to talk to me on one side of the spectrum. And then on the other side, it was just kind of all over the place. And then it kind of blossomed into, well, why don't we just have this conversation with everybody? Why don't we just kind of see what people are thinking about AI and robots in general? And that's kind of where the project is moving, just to have this massive anthology of thinkers and writers. So if you're interested in a particular topic on AI or robots or tech, instead of having to read thousands and thousands of pages, which I'm glad to do, but most people are not. And so, like, how can we just have very basic conversations, kind of like we're having right now, that everybody in the room could understand? That doesn't always play out, but that's kind of the heart of the Dolores Project, is to bring people onto the front porch, just sit down, discuss some very heady, deep topics, and sometimes it gets very passionate, but most of the time it's just me asking them questions to explain their research. And we talk about all kinds of different things, man. So I'm trying to grow that channel, and we started from zero, and have more video conversations, and just
where can they find it? What's the name?
Human. Yeah, it's the Dolores
The Dolores
Project.
Yeah. Okay.
Dolores is spelled D-O, not
Yes, Dio.
D-E.
Yeah.
That's a different project.
Okay. So if you're
So
listening, go to the
Dolores,
Dolores
based on,
Project YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe, hit the notification
yeah,
bell. And by the way, you can do that to this channel too. If you like, feel free we're drifting away. We've got a good size, um, podcast, audience. YouTube's a little bit harder to grow than the podcast, but we're growing. So I know about 90% of the people who watch this aren't subscribed. So subscribe, because I don't hear these conversations very many places. And I'm glad this was a basic conversation for you. This was the top of my intellectual capacity to have this conversation. So, but Josh, I always love having you on, man. You're a fascinating man. You're a man of God and a pastor. And I love that God has gifted people with different passions so that you can help some of the rest of us who are wouldn't know even where to begin with these conversations, but you help guide and direct us a little bit on that. So thank you so much for being on. Is there anything else of yours that we could plug, or anything else that you'd like to add?
that's it, man. I appreciate
Yep.
it. Thanks so much,
And I
Caleb.
look forward to the new book. I'll be sure to be one of the first people on the list to pre-order, and we'll have you on to talk about that. Sound good? All
Cool.
right. Thank you.